All right, let's just jump right in with a question that, well, it might make you a little uncomfortable. What if the way you see your own performance at work, your impact, your value, is totally different from how your manager sees it? We all like to think we're on the same page, but what if there's this huge, invisible disconnect, a perception gap, that's quietly shaping your entire career?
So let's make this personal for a second. Think about it. Are you 100% sure that if I asked your manager to rate your contribution, it would perfectly match how you rate yourself? I mean, think about your last big project, your daily grind, everything. Is it a perfect mirror, or are there maybe a few cracks in that reflection? Because, according to the research we're diving into, the answer for most people is a big no. And the data is pretty wild. Less than half, just 47.9% of employees and their managers actually agree on performance levels. That means more than half of us were walking around with a completely different idea of our value than the one person who has the biggest say in our future at the company. That's a lot.
And this is exactly what we call the perception gap. It's that measurable, tangible space between how we see ourselves and how our manager sees us. And look, figuring this out isn't just some interesting little thought exercise. It is absolutely crucial if you want to grow, get the credit you deserve, and actually move forward.
Yeah, that's the key right there. This isn't about imposter syndrome or, being overconfident. It's a real data-backed thing with very real effects on who gets the cool projects, who's seen as a leader, and ultimately who gets promoted. Closing this gap is really about taking back control of your own career story.
So the big question is, how do we close it? Well, the research actually gives us a fantastic roadmap. It's called the 4 stages of contribution, and it's a framework that helps you understand not just what you do, but how you're creating value, and it lays out the path to making a much bigger impact.
Okay, so here's how it works. At stage 1, you're basically learning the ropes, right? You need a good bit of guidance. Then you hit stage 2, and you're a solid, independent pro who can get things done. But stage 3, that's the big leap. That's where you become a multiplier. You make your impact bigger by mentoring and leading others. And finally, stage 4 is where you're actually shaping the strategy for the whole organization. It's a really powerful way to think about your career path. And what you see is that this journey totally transforms your role. You go from being a learner to a specialist, then to a coach, and finally to a true innovator. But what's so critical to get here is that what's expected of you completely changes at each stage. So the real key is knowing which stage your manager actually thinks you're in. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. The researchers didn't just come up with the framework. They measured this perception gap across all kinds of different people. And the data shows some really clear and honestly pretty surprising patterns in how we see ourselves versus how we're actually seen.
So here it is, the gap in plain sight. We consistently rate ourselves higher than our managers do, but look where the biggest disconnect is. Stage 3. We think we're mentoring and influencing others way more than our managers give us credit for, and on the flip side, our managers see a lot more of us back in stage 1, needing supervision, than we would probably ever admit to ourselves. That right there is the perception gap.
And this gap, it doesn't look the same for everyone. When you break it down by gender, the data shows that men tend to have a much wider perception gap, rating their own contributions higher than their managers do pretty much across the board. But what's fascinating is if you look at stage 2 for women, their self-perception of being an independent contributor is almost a perfect match with their manager's views. It suggests a much more calibrated sense of self-assessment.
Generation also plays a massive role. It turns out Millennials or Gen Y have the biggest disconnect of all. Their managers often see them as still needing guidance back in stage 1, but they see themselves as already being solid independent pros in stage 2. It's that classic story, right? I'm ready for more responsibility, bumping up against, I'm not so sure you're there yet.
Okay, but what if the problem isn't just you? What if your own manager has a perception gap? And this leads us to what I think is the most shocking finding in this whole study, something I'm calling the manager paradox. See, you might look at your boss as this great stage 3 mentor, but it's very possible that their boss sees them as just a stage 2 individual contributor.
Get ready for this one. A jaw-dropping 49%, that's nearly half, of all people who manage other people are rated by their own bosses as still operating at stage 1 or stage 2. Let that sink in. It means they're not being seen as leaders who contribute through others. They're seen as either still needing help themselves or, at best, just being a good solo worker.
So why does this happen? Well, this quote from the research just nails it. A lot of managers get stuck. They got promoted because they were amazing at their individual jobs, and they just keep that mindset. They see their team's questions as interruptions to their real work, instead of realizing that developing their team is their real work now. That's the heart of this whole manager paradox.
Okay, so after all that data, let's get to the most important question. What can you actually do about all this? How do you close your own gap and make sure your real impact gets noticed? Well, the great thing is, the research doesn't just point out the problem, it also points directly to the solution. You can think of these as basically the cheat codes for getting to that next level. First, strategic alignment. Always connect what you're doing back to the company's big goals. Second, develop capability. Don't just be a doer, be a teacher. Third, build trust by being incredibly reliable. Fourth, you have to actively seek and give feedback. It shows you're invested. And finally, have some organizational savvy. Know how to navigate the system to get things done. If you master these, you'll close that perception gap faster than anything else. So here we are, back at the beginning, but now you've got this new lens. You have the 4 stages, you understand the perception gap. The question isn't really if a gap exists anymore, but what it looks like for you. So be honest with yourself. Where do you think your manager would place you? And more importantly, what's the one thing you're going to do, maybe even this week, to start closing that gap?